They sent the ugly daughter as a mail-order bride joke. The cowboy chose her. Jake Thompson had always lived a life shaped by the land. The Montana plains stretched endlessly around his small ranch, golden in the sunlight and quiet except for the occasional rustle of the wind through tall grass. From dawn until dusk, Jake worked hard. He woke before the sun, fed the cattle, repaired fences, and made sure everything on the ranch ran smoothly. Life was simple, predictable, and sometimes lonely. His neighbors saw him as a kind man, honest and reliable, someone who would help anyone in need. But few knew him well enough to understand the quiet longing he carried. He had grown used to the rhythm of his days, the solitude that came with ranch life, and the way the wind whispered secrets across the fields. The only companions he truly trusted were his horse, Duke, and the occasional dog that wandered onto the property. Jake had tried friendship and conversation, but real connections were rare in a town where everyone seemed to know everyone else, and everyone's opinions carried weight. One afternoon, as he was repairing a broken fence post, his friends rode up on their horses, laughter trailing behind them like a cloud. There was Tom, his childhood friend who was always full of mischief, and Bill, the older rancher who loved a good joke. They dismounted, dusting off their boots, and Tom pulled a folded envelope from his saddlebag. "Jake," Tom said, grinning, "we've got something special for you." Jake wiped his brow, curious but wary. "What is it this time? Another bet you lost on the rodeo?" "Nope," Bill chimed in. "This one's better, way better. You're gonna love it." They handed him the envelope. Inside was a photograph of a young woman. She was plain by most standards, average height, simple clothes, and a slightly awkward smile. Someone had even written a note with the photo, joking that she was the perfect bride for a lonely cowboy like you. Jake stared at the picture, unsure what to think. A laugh escaped him, though it was tinged with disbelief. "You're kidding, right?" he asked, looking from Tom to Bill. "Not at all," Tom said, trying to suppress a laugh. "We found her through one of those mail-order services. Thought you'd get a kick out of it." Jake shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. He had heard of mail-order brides before, but never thought it would involve him. He had always believed love had to happen naturally, not through a joke or arrangement. And yet, as he held the photo, he couldn't help but notice something about the girl's eyes. They were honest, steady, and had a warmth that even the joke couldn't hide. Still, he shrugged and tucked the photo into his shirt pocket. "Well, thanks, I guess," he said, trying to keep the conversation light. "I'll be sure to call her someday." Tom and Bill laughed and rode off, leaving Jake alone with the photo and the wind sweeping across the fields. That night, after finishing his chores, Jake sat by the fire in his small living room. The ranch was quiet, the kind of quiet that made a person hear their own thoughts loud and clear. He pulled the photo from his pocket again, studying the girl's face. He didn't know her name, didn't know anything about her, but there was something about her that made him pause. As he stared, he realized he hadn't had a real conversation with a woman in years. Not one where he could truly be himself, where words didn't carry judgment or expectation. His life had been full of work, full of animals and chores and the endless Montana sky, but empty of companionship. And now, for the first time in a long while, he wondered what it might be like to share that life with someone who didn't judge him, someone who might see the world as he did. Days passed, and the photo remained on his bedside table. Every now and then he would glance at it, thinking about the girl in the picture, imagining her stepping onto the ranch, the dust from the driveway sticking to her shoes, the nervous smile she might give when she saw the horses, the fences, the wide-open plains. He imagined conversations late at night, sitting by the fire, sharing stories of their lives. Jake tried to push the thoughts away, reminding himself it was a joke. His friends had sent her as a prank after all. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that life on the ranch, while satisfying, had left him yearning for something else: companionship, trust, and perhaps even love. Weeks later, a letter arrived, addressed to him in handwriting he didn't recognize. It was from the girl in the photograph. She wrote politely, thanking him for considering the arrangement, though she admitted she had been told the photo was meant to make him laugh. She described herself simply, her love for reading, her small-town upbringing, and her curiosity about life on a ranch. She admitted she was nervous but also excited. Jake read the letter over and over. Something in her words spoke to him. She wasn't perfect by any standard society might set, but she was genuine. She was kind, thoughtful and willing to embrace the unknown. He felt a stir of something he hadn't felt in years, hope, maybe, or perhaps the excitement of a possibility that could change his life. For the first time, Jake allowed himself to imagine her on the ranch. He imagined teaching her to ride, showing her how to care for the cattle, laughing together when things went wrong. He imagined the quiet moments, the shared meals, the long nights under the vast Montana sky. And in that imagining, he felt a sense of anticipation he hadn't felt in a long time. The day finally came when the mail-order bride arrived. Jake waited at the edge of his driveway, the sun low in the sky, casting long shadows across the field. A carriage pulled up, and there she was, the girl from the photograph, standing nervously, clutching a small bag. She looked different from the picture, of course. The photograph had been simple, a little flat, and a little unkind. But the real person before him was alive, with a bright smile and a nervous energy that made her even more real. She stepped down from the carriage, brushing the dust from her dress, and looked at him with curiosity and a hint of shyness. "Hello," she said softly. Jake felt his heart beat faster. He extended a hand, and she took it, and in that simple gesture something shifted. The joke faded into the background. The laughter of his friends, the whispers of the town, all of it disappeared. All that mattered was the woman standing in front of him, the girl he had only known through a photo and letters, now real and present. As they walked toward the ranch house together, Jake realized that life could be full of surprises. The girl who had been sent as a joke might just become the person who changed his life. And for the first time in years, he felt the thrill of possibility. A life that was no longer just about work and solitude, but about connection, trust, and perhaps even love. By the time they reached the front door, Jake knew one thing for certain. He wasn't looking for a perfect bride, and he wasn't looking for someone to impress the town. He was looking for someone genuine, someone who could walk beside him through the wind, the dust, and the long, golden days of the Montana plains. And standing there, brushing the dust from her dress and smiling at him nervously, she was that person. Maggie Harper took her first few steps onto the ranch, her eyes wide with wonder. The Montana plains stretched endlessly around her, golden in the afternoon sun, with hills rising gently in the distance. She had imagined life on a ranch before, but seeing it in person was completely different. The smell of hay, the earthy scent of animals, and the sound of the wind rustling through the tall grass were all new and thrilling to her. She felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Jake walked beside her, keeping a careful pace. He wanted her first experience to be comfortable, not overwhelming. He pointed out the barn where the cattle were kept and the pens where the horses rested. Maggie listened closely, asking questions in a soft, polite voice. She was curious, eager to learn, and even though she was nervous, there was a spark of determination in her eyes. "This is Duke," Jake said, gesturing toward a tall, dark horse with a gentle expression. "He's friendly, but he's also strong. You'll want to be careful." Maggie approached Duke cautiously. She held out her hand, and the horse sniffed it before nuzzling her palm. She laughed softly, a sound that seemed to make the ranch feel warmer, brighter. Jake couldn't help but smile. It was a small moment, but something about her calm and genuine nature made him feel at ease. He realized that she wasn't just brave for coming here. She was thoughtful and observant, and she had a kind heart. Over the next few days, Maggie learned the rhythm of ranch life. She helped feed the animals, swept the barn, and learned how to gather eggs from the chickens. She made mistakes, of course. She spilled some feed and tripped over the barn steps, but Jake never criticized her. Instead, he showed her patiently how to do each task, guiding her hand when needed and encouraging her with quiet words. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat on the porch, watching the sun set behind the hills. Maggie held a cup of warm tea in her hands, while Jake leaned back in his chair, letting the cool evening breeze brush against his face. They were both tired, their clothes dusty and worn, but neither seemed to mind. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. "You know," Maggie said softly, "I didn't think life on a ranch would be like this. It's harder than I imagined, but also beautiful." Jake looked at her, noticing the way her eyes reflected the colors of the sunset. "It is hard," he agreed. "But if you work hard and care about what you do, it feels right. Most people don't understand it, but some do." Maggie smiled. "I want to understand it. I want to be part of it. I want to learn." Her words struck a chord in Jake. He had expected her to be intimidated, maybe even overwhelmed, but instead she showed courage and curiosity. He realized that she was not here just to meet expectations or play a role in a joke. She was here to live, to grow, and to be herself. As the days turned into weeks, Maggie became more confident in her tasks. She could ride Duke across the fields without fear, mend fences alongside Jake, and even guide the cattle back to the barn. She laughed when she made mistakes, learning to see them as part of the experience rather than failures. Jake admired her patience and determination. She had a natural rhythm, a way of moving that fit surprisingly well with the work around the ranch. Their bond grew slowly, like a river carving its path through the land. They shared stories while working side by side. Maggie told Jake about her childhood in a small town, her love for reading, and her dream of experiencing life outside her comfort zone. Jake shared his memories of growing up on the ranch, of riding horses with his father, and the challenges of keeping the family land running. They listened, really listened, and found themselves understanding each other better than they had expected. One morning after a heavy rain, Jake and Maggie walked through the muddy fields to check on the cattle. Maggie slipped once or twice, laughing as she steadied herself on Jake's shoulder. "You're a good teacher," she said, her eyes sparkling. "I've learned so much already." Jake chuckled. "You're a fast learner. I think you've got a natural talent for this life. Most people give up after a week." Maggie shook her head. "I won't give up. I want to be here. I want to be part of this." Jake felt a warmth spread through him. It wasn't just pride in her progress. It was something deeper, a recognition of her courage, her willingness to embrace a life that was completely new and challenging. He began to realize that the woman standing beside him, covered in mud and smiling despite it, was someone special. But life on the ranch wasn't always easy. One afternoon, a young calf became stuck in the mud, struggling to free itself. Jake and Maggie worked together to pull it out, slipping and laughing, their hands working in tandem. It was exhausting, but when the calf finally stumbled free, Maggie hugged it gently, her face lit with relief and joy. Jake looked at her and felt a surge of admiration. She wasn't perfect, she had never been expected to be, but she had a heart big enough to care for creatures far smaller and weaker than herself. Evenings were spent around the fire. They cooked simple meals, sharing bread and stew, talking about dreams, fears, and hopes. Maggie admitted that she had been nervous about coming here, worried that she wouldn't fit in, that she might be laughed at or rejected. Jake listened, understanding the weight of courage it took to leave everything familiar behind. "You're stronger than you think," he told her one night, handing her a warm mug of tea. "And braver. Most people would have turned around the moment they realized what they were walking into, but you stayed." Maggie smiled, her cheeks warming. "I didn't want to run away. I wanted to see what life here was really like, and I wanted to meet you." Jake looked down at the fire, feeling a strange flutter in his chest. There was no awkwardness, no forced words, just honesty and openness between them. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen, understood, and connected. The town, of course, had its opinions. Rumors spread about the mail-order bride who had come to Jake's ranch. Some laughed, others whispered, but Maggie paid little attention. She focused on learning, working, and being part of the life she had chosen. Her confidence grew, and soon, the townspeople who had doubted her began to notice her kindness, intelligence, and genuine nature. One afternoon, while checking fences along the far edge of the property, Jake stopped and looked at Maggie. She was laughing at something he had said, her hair catching the sunlight, her eyes bright and alive. He realized that he wasn't just drawn to her because of her courage or determination. He liked her presence, the way she made ordinary moments feel special. As the weeks passed, their friendship deepened into something more profound. They worked together, laughed together, and began to share small, meaningful moments. The quiet smile over a morning cup of coffee, the gentle brush of hands while guiding cattle, the way their conversations lingered long after the work was done. Jake's friends, who had sent her as a joke, began to see the truth. What had started as a prank had blossomed into something real. Maggie wasn't just a guest on the ranch. She was becoming part of it, part of Jake's life, part of the land itself. One evening, after a particularly long day, Jake and Maggie sat on the porch once more. The sky was painted with oranges and pinks, the wind soft and warm. Maggie rested her head on her hands, looking out at the fields. "I never thought I'd find a place like this," she said quietly. "I never thought I'd meet someone like you." Jake turned to her, a soft smile on his face. "And I never thought I'd meet someone like you either," he admitted. For a moment there was silence, but it was a comfortable, peaceful silence, full of understanding and trust. They watched the sun dip behind the hills, feeling that the world was vast, full of challenges, yet somehow also full of possibilities. And in that quiet, golden moment, Jake realized something important. This wasn't about a joke or appearances or what anyone else thought. It was about two people willing to meet each other halfway, willing to learn, to work, and to grow together. And that was the kind of connection that could change a life forever. Life on the ranch was becoming routine for Maggie and Jake, but not in a boring way. Each day brought new challenges, and each day strengthened the bond between them. Maggie had grown more confident in her work, riding Duke across the wide fields, mending fences without help, and even guiding the younger cattle. She laughed more freely now, and her quiet courage inspired Jake more than he expected. He found himself looking forward to her company, to the sound of her laughter echoing across the plains, and to the small moments they shared while tending the ranch together. But the world outside the ranch wasn't always as kind as the life they were building. Rumors about Maggie's arrival had begun circulating in town, and some people whispered cruel things about the mail-order bride who had come as a joke. A few of Jake's neighbors suggested that she wasn't good enough for him, that she didn't belong in his world, that the prank her arrival had started should have ended in laughter at her expense. Jake ignored the whispers at first. He had never cared much about the opinions of others, but he noticed Maggie growing quieter after overhearing some of the gossip. One evening, after feeding the animals, she sat on the porch with her knees drawn to her chest, staring at the horizon. Her face, usually bright with determination, looked troubled. Jake sat beside her without saying anything at first. He could see the tension in her shoulders and the worry in her eyes. Finally, he asked gently, "What's on your mind?" Maggie sighed. "I heard some of the people in town talking. They said things, not very nice things about me, about us. I didn't expect it to feel so harsh." Jake put a hand on hers, warm and steady. "People will always have opinions," he said softly. "Most of them don't matter. What matters is here." He gestured to the ranch and then to her, "and what we're building together. Don't let their words define you. You've already proven yourself every day, not just to me, but to everyone who actually watches what you do instead of listening to gossip." Maggie nodded, taking a deep breath. Jake's words comforted her, but she knew it wouldn't be easy to ignore the town completely. Life here, she realized, was not just about learning to ride horses or feed cattle. It was also about standing firm, even when others judged you unfairly. The following week brought a new challenge. A sudden storm swept over the plains, stronger than anything either of them had expected. Rain poured down, turning the dirt paths into thick mud. Winds whipped across the fields and lightning flashed across the dark sky. The cattle were restless, bleating nervously, and some tried to escape their pens. Jake and Maggie worked tirelessly through the storm. They ran between the barns and fields, securing gates, calming the animals, and making sure no one was hurt. Maggie slipped in the mud more than once, but each time she rose quickly, determined not to give up. Her hands were sore, her clothes soaked, and her hair plastered to her face, yet she pressed on. Jake admired her resilience. He had worked on this ranch his entire life, and he had never met anyone willing to endure so much with such quiet strength. "You're tougher than you realize," he said during a brief break, handing her a towel. "Most people would have gone home hours ago." Maggie shook her head, smiling through her exhaustion. "I can't leave. Not when there's work to do. I promised myself I'd be part of this, and I meant it." By the end of the storm, both were drenched and exhausted, but the ranch had survived without serious damage. They collapsed on the porch, wrapped in blankets, and shared a simple meal by candlelight. Neither spoke much at first. The day's work had been too intense for words. But sitting there together, Maggie realized something important. She had earned Jake's respect, and in doing so, she had begun to earn her own confidence as well. As the weeks passed, they faced more challenges, both big and small. One morning, Jake discovered that a section of fence had collapsed overnight. This allowed some cattle to wander toward a neighboring property. They had to act quickly to round them up before anyone noticed. Maggie and Jake ran through the fields, calling to the cattle and guiding them back to safety. The experience was chaotic, exhausting, and stressful, yet it brought them closer. Working side by side, they learned to anticipate each other's moves without speaking, trusting that the other would act wisely. During quieter moments, their connection deepened even more. They began to share personal stories. Maggie talked about growing up in a small town with limited opportunities, the books she loved, and the dreams she had once thought impossible. Jake shared memories of his childhood on the ranch, his parents' lessons about hard work, and the loneliness he had felt while keeping the land running on his own. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields, Maggie asked a question she had been holding back. "Jake, why didn't you send me away when you saw me for the first time?" "I mean the photo. I know it was a joke, but you didn't seem upset or disappointed. I don't understand why." Jake leaned back in his chair, looking thoughtful. "Because the photo didn't matter. I could see you, really see you. And what I saw was someone honest, kind, and strong. Someone I wanted to know, not someone to laugh at. It wasn't about looks or jokes. It was about character, and you have a good heart." Maggie felt warmth spread through her chest. She had expected mockery, maybe even rejection, but instead she found acceptance and understanding. For the first time in a long while, she felt safe, appreciated, and respected. But not everything was smooth. Some townspeople continued to gossip, and a few even questioned Jake's judgment. "Why would a man like Jake choose someone like her?" they whispered. "Surely she doesn't belong in his world." Maggie heard the words, but she chose to focus on what mattered, the trust, respect, and growing affection she shared with Jake. One afternoon, a young neighbor girl, curious about Maggie's arrival, came to visit. She asked Maggie questions about life on the ranch and watched as Maggie calmly and confidently explained how to care for the animals and repair fences. The girl's eyes grew wide with admiration, and she ran back to tell her parents what she had learned. Slowly, Maggie's efforts and character began to change some people's minds. Her dedication could not be ignored. Jake watched all of this quietly, proud but never boastful. He had known from the beginning that Maggie was different, not in some flashy or noticeable way, but in the way she carried herself, worked hard, and treated everyone with kindness. He realized that life with her wasn't just about companionship, it was about partnership. They could face challenges together, support each other, and grow as a team. One evening, after another long day, they sat on the porch, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Maggie leaned back, tired but content, and spoke softly. "I didn't know I could be happy here. I thought life would always be about surviving, but now it feels like I can actually live." Jake nodded, smiling. "That's what I've always hoped for, too. I wanted someone who could see this life for what it is, hard work, yes, but also beauty, peace, and freedom. You've reminded me that there's more to life than just work. There's joy and laughter and love." Maggie looked at him, feeling a warmth she hadn't expected. They sat together in silence for a while, letting the evening wind carry away the worries and doubts of the day. They didn't need words, their presence was enough. As part 3 of their story unfolded, both Jake and Maggie realized that life wasn't just about the tasks of a ranch or the opinions of the town. It was about trust, courage, and the willingness to stand together, even when others doubted them. Every challenge they faced, from storms to gossip to the unpredictable needs of the animals, became a test of their growing partnership. And with each test, they grew stronger, more connected, and more certain that their lives had been meant to intersect in this unlikely, yet perfect way. By the time the stars filled the sky that night, Maggie and Jake knew something had changed. They were no longer just a cowboy and a newcomer. They were a team, ready to face whatever life on the Montana plains could throw at them. And deep down, both felt the quiet thrill of knowing that the next chapters of their lives would be faced together, with courage, trust, and an unspoken promise that neither would walk alone again. Life on the ranch had settled into a rhythm that was both challenging and comforting. Jake and Maggie had grown used to each other's presence, to the early mornings, the long days, and the quiet evenings by the fire. But the outside world was never far away, and soon they would be forced to confront opinions and expectations that neither of them could ignore. It started with a letter from Maggie's family. They had been hesitant about her decision to come so far, and now, weeks into her life on the ranch, they wrote again. Their tone was cautious, but their words carried concern. They questioned whether she was truly safe, whether she could trust someone she had never met before, and whether she was making the right choice by staying in a place so far from home. Maggie read the letter quietly, her fingers trembling slightly. She had already faced so much, The initial skepticism of the town, the gossip, the heavy work, and now her family's doubts weighed on her. She didn't know what to do. Should she follow their advice and leave the ranch or trust the life she was building here? Jake noticed her distress and waited until they were alone. "You've been quiet," he said gently, sitting beside her on the porch. "What's wrong?" Maggie held the letter in her hands, unsure how to explain. "It's from my family. They're worried about me, about this place." "About us?" She paused, struggling to find the right words. "They think I'm making a mistake." Jake took her hand, warm and reassuring. "Maggie, you're not making a mistake. You chose this life and you've faced every challenge that came your way. You've proven yourself not just to me, but to everyone around here. Your family's worry comes from love, but you don't have to let it control your choices." Maggie nodded, tears threatening to fall. She had always cared deeply about her family's opinion, but she realized that they didn't truly know the life she was experiencing here. They hadn't seen her struggle in the mud with the cattle, hadn't heard her laughter on the porch, hadn't watched the way she and Jake had begun to understand each other without needing words. That evening, they went together to the town, facing the whispers and glances from neighbors who still doubted Maggie's place on the ranch. Some looked disapproving, others curious, and a few even openly critical. But Maggie walked with her head held high, Jake's steady presence beside her giving her confidence. She realized that she had already earned respect through her actions, and the opinions of those who hadn't watched her work mattered little. The real challenge, however, came when a large shipment of cattle arrived unexpectedly, far more than Jake had anticipated. The herd needed immediate attention, and the tasks required coordination, speed, and strength. Jake was used to handling such situations, but he couldn't do it alone, and he relied heavily on Maggie's skills. They worked together tirelessly, directing the new cattle into pens, ensuring that none escaped, and checking each animal for injuries. Maggie's confidence shone brightly. She gave clear instructions, moved quickly without panic, and stayed calm even when the cattle became restless. Jake noticed how naturally she had adapted to this life, how her courage had grown, and how her decisions were just as important as his. During a break, Jake and Maggie sat on the edge of a fence, breathing heavily but smiling at each other. "You know," Jake said, "I've never seen anyone handle a situation like that so well. You've got the mind of a rancher already." Maggie laughed softly, brushing mud from her hands. "I learned from the best," she replied, nodding toward Jake. "But I still worry." "What if something goes wrong?" Jake placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll face it together, that's what matters. We trust each other and we work as a team, nothing else counts." Despite their successes, the opinions of others still lingered. One afternoon, a group of neighboring ranchers stopped by unannounced, curious to see the woman who had come as a joke. They made small talk at first, but their questions quickly turned pointed. "Are you really going to stay here?" one asked. "Do you think this life is for you?" Maggie answered politely, her voice steady. "Yes, I want to be here. I've learned a lot and I want to continue learning. I'm part of this ranch now." The neighbors exchanged glances, some impressed, some skeptical. But Jake stood firmly beside her, his presence a quiet declaration of support. "She's done more than most people would," he said. "If anyone has a problem with that, it's not our concern." That moment marked a turning point. Maggie realized that her place on the ranch, and in Jake's life, was secure not because of anyone else's approval, but because of the trust and respect they had built together. She didn't need to prove herself to the town. She only needed to stay true to who she was and continue working alongside Jake. Later that week, another challenge tested their bond. A neighbor's fence had collapsed, allowing some of Jake's cattle to wander onto their land. The neighbor was angry, and a confrontation seemed inevitable. Jake and Maggie rode together to return the cattle, knowing that how they handled the situation could affect not only their reputation, but also the peace of the community. Maggie stayed calm as Jake spoke to the neighbor, explaining the situation respectfully and offering to help repair the fence. Her presence, quiet but firm, made it clear that she was part of the team, not just a guest or visitor. The neighbor, after seeing her composure and listening to Jake's honesty, softened, and the conflict was resolved peacefully. That evening, as they returned to the ranch, Maggie spoke quietly. "I never imagined life could be like this. Full of challenges, yes, but also full of moments that matter. I'm glad I stayed." Jake looked at her, his eyes reflecting the fading light. "Me too. And I'm glad you stayed for the right reasons, not because anyone told you to, but because you wanted to be here. It was a lesson they both learned over and over. Life on the ranch was not just about work, but about choices. About standing up for what mattered, even when it was difficult, and about trusting each other through every storm, every challenge, and every moment of doubt. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between Jake and Maggie grew stronger. They faced storms, difficult tasks, and the opinions of others, but they faced them together. Every challenge became a shared experience, every success a shared victory. Maggie's confidence continued to grow, and Jake's admiration for her never wavered. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars appear in the clear Montana sky, Maggie spoke softly. "I think I understand now why people say love is about more than appearances. It's about trust, partnership, and choosing each other, even when it's hard." Jake nodded, reaching for her hand. "Exactly, and I choose you, Maggie. Not because of what others think, not because of a joke or expectation, but because you've shown me what it means to be strong, kind, and brave. You become part of this life in a way no one else could." Maggie's heart swelled with emotion. She realized that the fear she had felt of judgment, of failure, of the unknown, had been replaced with trust, courage, and love. They had faced challenges that could have torn others apart, but instead, those challenges had drawn them closer together. As the night settled around the ranch, Jake and Maggie felt a quiet peace. The storms, the gossip, and the unexpected challenges were still part of life, but they no longer felt threatening. They knew they could face anything together, as partners, friends, and something more. And in that moment, under the wide, starlit sky, they understood that life was not about perfection or approval. It was about the choices they made, the courage to stand together, and the trust that bound them through every difficulty. They had found something rare and precious, a bond that could weather any storm and endure any challenge, simply because it was built on honesty, respect, and love. Life on the ranch had changed in ways neither Jake nor Maggie had expected. What had started as a joke from his friends had transformed into something real, something deep and meaningful. The small, quiet ranch in Montana was no longer just a place to work. It had become a home, filled with shared memories, laughter, and hard-earned trust. Maggie had grown into her new life, learning the ways of the land, the rhythm of the animals, and the quiet strength it took to survive and thrive in such a demanding environment. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of dew on the grass. Maggie woke early, as she always did, and stepped outside. The sun was just beginning to rise over the hills, casting golden light across the fields. She watched Duke graze in the distance and felt a wave of gratitude. She had come here unsure, nervous, and a little scared. But now, standing there with the land stretching endlessly before her, she knew she had made the right choice. She belonged here. Jake joined her a few moments later, carrying a bucket of fresh feed. He smiled when he saw her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Morning," he said simply. "Morning," Maggie replied, returning his smile. They moved through the morning chores together, working side by side with a quiet understanding. There was no need for constant conversation. Their familiarity with the ranch and with each other made everything flow naturally. Maggie's confidence had grown immensely over the past months. She handled the animals with ease, repaired fences without hesitation, and even managed the small tasks that Jake had once thought would take months to teach her. As the day wore on, they faced a small emergency. One of the older cows had wandered off and gotten stuck near the edge of a creek. Maggie didn't panic. She followed Jake's instructions carefully, keeping her calm even as the water rushed past her boots. Together, they guided the cow back to safer ground, laughing softly once the danger had passed. These moments, small but significant, had built their trust and deepened their bond. Later that afternoon, they sat on the porch, sharing a simple meal. The town had begun to notice the changes in Maggie. Those who had once whispered jokes now nodded respectfully when they saw her working alongside Jake, managing the ranch with intelligence, patience, and heart. She had earned her place here not through words or appearances, but through effort, courage, and character. "Maggie," Jake said softly, "I think they finally see what I've known all along." Maggie looked at him, curiosity in her eyes. "What's that?" "That you belong here," he replied. "That this life, this ranch, and even me were better because you're part of it. You've proven that strength isn't about being loud or flashy. It's about heart, determination, and caring for the things that matter. And you've got that in abundance." Maggie felt a warmth she hadn't known she could feel. She had always worried about proving herself, about being accepted, and now she realized that acceptance had never been the real goal. The real goal was being true to herself and doing the work she believed in. And in doing so, she had earned more than approval. She had earned trust, respect, and a place in Jake's life. That evening, Jake led Maggie to a quiet spot near the edge of the ranch, where the hills rolled gently into the horizon. The sky was painted with shades of orange, pink, and purple as the sun set. He took her hand in his, steady and reassuring. "Maggie," he said, "these past months have shown me something important. Life is unpredictable, full of challenges we can't always see coming. But I've also learned that when someone is willing to stand by your side, work with you, and face those challenges together, life becomes better, richer, fuller." Maggie squeezed his hand, understanding the unspoken words in his voice. She had felt the same way. She had come to the ranch expecting uncertainty and fear, but she had found something far more valuable: partnership, trust, and love. "I feel the same, Jake," she whispered. "I came here unsure of everything, but I've learned that the right life isn't about perfection or appearances. It's about connection, about choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. And I choose this life, and I choose you." Jake smiled, a slow, quiet smile that spoke of relief, pride, and joy. He pulled her close, and for a moment there was only the sound of the wind in the grass, the distant calls of animals settling for the night, and the quiet beating of their hearts in unison. Over the next weeks, life continued in its rhythm, but now with a sense of harmony that neither had felt before. They worked together seamlessly, laughed together often, and shared quiet moments of reflection and joy. The ranch itself seemed to flourish under their combined care, as though the land recognized the partnership that had grown there. Neighbors who had doubted Maggie's presence now approached her for advice, seeking her guidance on animal care, fencing, and even the best way to plan for a storm. Children watched in admiration as she demonstrated patience and skill, and slowly, the town's attitude shifted. The girl who had arrived as a joke had become a respected, integral part of the community. One afternoon, after finishing a particularly long day of work, Jake and Maggie sat on the porch, sipping tea and watching the golden light of late afternoon wash over the fields. Maggie leaned her head on Jake's shoulder, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "You know," she said softly, "I never imagined I could be this happy. I thought life would always be about surviving, about doing the work because it had to be done. But now it feels like I'm living, not just surviving." Jake kissed her forehead gently. "I feel the same. Life is full of work and challenges, yes, but it's also full of moments like this, quiet, simple, and meaningful, and it's better because we face it together." As the months passed, the bond between Jake and Maggie deepened further. Their love was no longer quiet or uncertain. It was steady, rooted in shared experience, trust, and understanding. Every challenge they faced, from storms to the unexpected needs of the ranch, strengthened their partnership and reinforced the decision they had made to trust each other fully. Then came the day that made everything feel complete. Jake and Maggie had been invited to a small town gathering, a celebration for the local ranchers and their families. For the first time, they attended not as newcomers or outsiders, but as equals, respected and admired for their hard work and dedication. The townspeople who had once whispered and laughed now nodded, smiled, and offered congratulations. During the gathering, Jake stood and addressed the crowd. "I know some of you thought this was just a joke," he said, glancing at Maggie with affection. "But what you see here is real. Maggie came here, worked hard, learned fast, and proved herself in every way. She's not just part of this ranch, she's part of my life, and she's part of this community." The applause was warm and genuine. Maggie's eyes glistened with tears, and she squeezed Jake's hand, feeling the truth of his words. She had arrived as an outsider, uncertain and nervous, and now she was accepted, respected, and loved. Later, as the sun set behind the hills and the stars began to appear in the clear Montana sky, Jake and Maggie walked hand in hand through the fields. The land stretched endlessly before them, golden and alive in the last light of day. "I never expected this," Maggie said quietly. "I never imagined life could be so full, so rich, so ours." Jake smiled, looking out at the horizon. "Life has a way of surprising you. Sometimes the things that start as jokes, doubts, or fears can turn into something amazing. We just have to be brave enough to trust it." Maggie nodded, feeling the truth in his words. She had trusted, she had worked, she had given herself to the life she wanted, and now she had everything she had hoped for: love, trust, respect, and a place to call home. And as they stood together in the fading light, the wind softly brushing against them, they knew that this was just the beginning. The future would hold challenges, of course, but with each other's support, there was nothing they could not face. Their story, once started as a joke, had grown into something beautiful, lasting, and true. Jake turned to Maggie, smiling. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Maggie returned his smile, feeling a warmth and certainty she had never known before. "Together," she echoed. And in that moment, under the endless Montana sky, surrounded by the land they loved and the life they had built, they knew something wonderful. They had found a love that could weather any storm, face any challenge, and endure any test. It was a love born not of appearance or circumstance, but of courage, trust, and the simple, steadfast choice to be together.